Welcome, everyone. I'm Sue Keisler, Executive Director of xMinds, the organization that's hosting this Lunch and Learn. We have only an hour to address a very big topic, so I'm going to keep my introduction very short. The topic today is executive functioning challenges for students on the autism spectrum. And we have with us two experts in the field. Marci Skigen is an executive functioning specialist, educational therapist, special education advocate, and founder of Enhance EFS. She's also a valued member of the xMinds board. Rachel Sushner is an executive functioning specialist, educational therapist and college consultant, also at Enhance EFS. So our two panelists today will be spending an hour answering your questions and presenting information about this topic. A couple of things I just want to explain at the start. Though this is going to last for an hour, we're going to have questions not just at the end, but throughout. They will stop, the presenters will stop at different points and ask for questions. Also, we're recording this, and it's going to be and anyone who wants to get the Spanish channel can listen in Spanish by going to the interpretation button and choosing that. I think that's it. I want to just thank you both for doing this presentation, and I'll hand it over to you, Marci. You're on mute, Marci.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sue. So delighted to be here. Rachel and I are thrilled to be able to talk about one of our favorite topics, executive functioning. So with that said, let's get started. Let me just get our slides going. There we go. Okay. So we're going to start with talking about, by the end of the hour, what you will learn. You will learn about multiple executive functions, strategies to support EF needs, accommodations and modifications, and have an opportunity to ask questions. What are executive functioning skills? They're brain-based skills that enable us to focus our attention, remember instruction, plan, and execute tasks. These skills begin to develop by age 2 and gradually develop in your child's prefrontal cortex as your child gets older. Generally, executive functioning reaches its full development between the ages of 25 to 30. This is tricky because as a society, we tend to expect students 12 to 25 to behave as if they have an adult brain. Since they don't, they can't consistently make effective time management choices that adults expect them to make. This can be the cause of many conflicts between parents and teenagers. Trust me, I know, I have 4, as well as difficulties in school. The good news is there are strategies that can be taught to support executive functioning as the brain is developing. The brain, some sources state that up to 80% of autistic students may have executive functioning difficulty. Students with ADHD are often 30 to 40% delayed in development. This tends to make them more likely to act motivated by short-term rather than long-term goals. The back of the brain is where information already learned is stored. The front part of the brain is where you use the information to be socially effective and succeed in life. This prefrontal cortex mediates executive function and contains 4 major circuits. The what circuit controls working memory, helping you to execute, plan goals, and specific steps needed to complete a project. The when circuit helps you organize the order in which you complete activities and address timelines. The why circuit controls emotions, what you think about and how you feel. The 4th how circuit controls self-awareness of your feelings and experiences. Students with executive functioning challenges and or ADHD may experience impairments in one or more of these circuits, and therefore their symptoms may touch memory, planning, emotional regulation, and social skills. Rachel?
Okay, so I think what we're all here to learn about today with that great introduction is what do executive functioning challenges look like at home and at school? And what Marci and I are going to do are going to spend the next little bit of time explaining some executive functioning domains, providing you with a definition of what those are. For each slide that we present, we're going to pose a reflective question. This question is designed for you to either ask yourself if you are interested in understanding and learning more about executive functioning for yourself, but most likely for you as a parent to think about from the perspective of your child or whomever you are thinking about with regard to these executive functioning challenges. And then we're going to talk about what this looks like practically, so some of the challenges, and then explore and offer some strategies.
Okay, Rachel, we're going to start with metacognition.
Okay, so we're going to start with metacognition. It's a big word, and I like to think about this as like the big one. Metacognition is this pause. It's this ability to stop and think about what your thought process is. So pausing to look at what you are doing before you take action. It is the idea of self-monitoring. It is self-awareness. It is reflection. And so when we think about metacognition, this ability to pause and reflect on our action, as we explain the rest of the executive function domains, you will see that this one has a pretty direct impact on the effectiveness and the efficiency of the rest of them. Because if we can't pause and think about what we are doing, it makes those other skills a little bit harder to work together. And this is a big one because when we can pause and we can engage in this opportunity of reflection, it can really help us develop long-lasting behavior change and build habits and skills. So the question to ask yourself, a reflecting question for yourself or for your child, is, are you able to reflect and evaluate choices or actions in order to inform future ones? So that pause, can you pause and think? Now, what does this look like? What you might see? It might be repeated errors that have similar or same consequences. So repeating the same mistake over and over again. There may be overconfidence. Yeah, I've got it. I don't need to study for that test. I'm totally fine. It may be an inability to evaluate conflict and resolution. So not understanding why there was conflict, and certainly difficulty engaging how to resolve that. And surprise by a poor grade or negative feedback. That's a biggie. A lot of times students will say, I'm totally fine. I'm caught up on my work. I've got it. I've studied. And then the interim comes and the grade is a lot lower than expected. And the student is surprised.
Okay, so what can you try so that you can work on improving these? Well, we can increase wait time for a response, allowing time to pause. Practicing this at home by waiting for explanations rather than filling in sentences for your child and providing a let me think about that for a moment statement to your child is a great model. Providing structured choices, giving your child a sense of control and allowing them to consider the most effective choice. They can consider these choices by using reflective thinking, and this can be facilitated by asking questions such as, what was the easiest and most challenging for me to learn this week? Why? What study strategies worked and did not work? Does this answer make sense given the information that was provided? What strategies did I use to solve this problem that was helpful? There are several more reflective questions that your children can answer as they go through this. Moving on, working memory.
Okay, so working memory simply is the ability to keep track of information that we need. It's kind of like that brain's notepad. So it's where you write those things down in your brain and hold on to them. It's inherently limited. You use it for a finite amount of time. And the purpose of working memory is to hold that information temporarily so that we can go ahead and complete a task. So we use it for lots of daily organization and daily tasks. The average brain can only hold on to a certain number of chunks at a time. And when we think about that, we're saying the average fully developed brain. And so, reflecting back to what Marci had shared earlier, our expectations often for children, adolescents, teenagers are unintentionally expectations that are really designed for like a fully developed brain. So asking them to hold on to 5 or 6 directions at a time is really challenging. So the question to reflect on is, are you able to remember all of the directions without missing a step or writing them down? So what you might see, what will this look like? Having to be reminded to complete a task. This is a biggie, is certainly at home. Okay, hang up, you came home. Did you hang up your coat and put your backpack away? Like even the basic routines. This can also look like requests for clarification of tasks. So in the classroom, a teacher gave directions and then immediately the hand is up, or a couple minutes later when they realize, oh, everybody else has started, like what's going on, asking for clarification.
And what can you try? Well, we can develop routines. We can assist students in creating checklists for tasks with multiple steps. These lists are most effective when they are devised by the student themselves. So as much as we want to, as parents, sit down and write a list for our child, we really just want to assist them in writing their own list. Break down big chunks of information into smaller pieces and play memory games such as cards and Rummy Cube.
Okay,
Response inhibition.
Yeah, I was just taking a quick look at the chat because there was a comment there about lists and lists being so helpful to kind of make sense of everything. And we'll get to that a little further. Absolutely. All these skills, all of these executive functioning domains really work together. They work cohesively together. So yes, we'll get to lists. Those are great. We love lists. Okay, response inhibition. So simply, that is the ability to control your impulses. So it is the opposite of being impulsive. It is pausing to take turns and engaging either in conversation or in a game. This obviously looks like raising your hand in class and following all those norms. But response inhibition, for those who struggle with it, are difficulties with all of those things. So the question to reflect on is, can your brain say no to itself and listen? So even though you just want to blurt out the response, or you just want to like share your idea right now because you're in an engaging conversation and you don't want to wait until it's kind of your turn, can you pause and say no and like allow yourself to wait for that appropriate time? So this looks like blurting out or interrupting. This can be in the classroom, it can be at the dinner table, it can be in the car. This looks like engaging in risky behavior. So making poor choices because that is what our impulsive desire is.
So what can we try? Well, providing choices to stop and think, and providing an opportunity to stop and think. This double downs on what I spoke about earlier in that teaching to pause. Playing games that require turn taking, model response inhibition, talking out choices. I really want this, but, or I'd like to give you a thoughtful answer. Can I have a moment to think about that? Review directions. Practice having a child repeat to ensure understanding. Avoid surprises and prime as often as possible. In 15 minutes, this is what we have coming up. The expectations are for you to, and then fill in the blank, so they know what it is that's expected of them. All right. Technical difficulties, there we go.
Okay.
Task initiation.
So task initiation sounds kind of like what it is. It is getting started on tasks. So not just letting it sit there, but actually just doing it. The reflective question to think about is, are you able to get started on things you don't want to do without being asked or without being prodded or reminded? This looks like a lot of struggles to complete daily tasks without reminders. Particularly those things that are just like ongoing, getting started on the things we don't want to do. So for students, this might be like a big project or a big assignment, or something they perceive as difficult, a test or a quiz. In the adult world, maybe we don't want to start our laundry. We don't want to wash the dishes, but just like getting in and getting started. So what this might look like, you freeze up, or your child freezes up and are unsure where or how to begin a task. So just kind of this pause, this freeze. A lot of procrastination, which is a biggie. Marci and I both deal with a lot of individuals who struggle with procrastination and pushing things off and waiting till that last minute. And an inaccurate estimate of task duration. Like they make this task this huge like thing in their mind, and so they think it's a bigger deal than it is, and that often contributes to difficulty getting started.
So what can we try? Well, we can use a timer to count down time to get to work. We can use our cell phone timer. We can use an analog clock, dividing the clock into different subsections, saying, in this section, I'm going to do math. In this section, I'm going to take a break. In this section, I am going to do English. And so we know when to get started. We can also use cube timers. We can create schedules for chores and homework that establish routines, do a physical activity before beginning a work task to sort of get out that energy, whether it's jumping jacks, taking a quick run, whether it is, doing a chore that requires some physical motion. And then we want to share a model of expected outcomes before getting started. This is especially helpful when working on projects, and especially helpful to teachers to show our students.
I just want to address, I just noticed one more comment in the chat. I've heard that referred to as the quote unquote wall of awful, when the idea of the task is more overwhelming than it needs to be. I love that. I love that language. I think that's so true. We see that often, that what the picture, that idea of what that project or task or whatever it is that we're feeling just stuck by is so big in our minds that that alone just kind of halts us in place. Okay. Okay, moving next to, I think we'll kind of address some of the lists a little bit here. Planning and prioritizing. So this is knowledge of the planning process and what that looks like, and the ability to make a plan, breaking down tasks into smaller pieces. So I think this is kind of like two sides of the same coin. Planning is thinking about the tasks that we need to do to achieve our goal. And prioritizing is making sure you are doing the right tasks and putting them in the right order so that you can get to that goal that you've planned out. There are a lot of common tools that Marci will talk about that we use for this. The reflection question to ask yourself or think about for your child is, are you able to break a big project into steps and get it done on time? So what you might see. Difficulty determining which parts of the project are most important. So focusing inordinate amounts of effort in the wrong places. Difficulty using a planner. That is a huge, huge one that we encounter.
So what can we try? Well, we can number tasks in order of deadlines, having students start with the assignment that is due first. Complete tasks one step at a time, as opposed to completing a little bit of math and a little bit of English because, we all of a sudden got stuck and then we moved to something else and then we want to move back. That can get really confusing. Scheduling a time to complete work during your most productive hours. For some, it's right after school, while others may have this after, dinner in the evening. Kind of think of whether or not you're a morning person, an afternoon person, or an evening person. Create a master list and a schedule time to review it. This can be on a whiteboard, a planner, or a chart made on a Google Doc, as long as it's printed out and kept in front of the student so that they are able to, it helps assist with focus. Organization.
Okay. Organization, which I think we think about pretty quickly when we talk about executive functioning, because we think about it related to time management and organization. It's the ability to organize our thoughts and materials. So it's both the physical stuff, which again, we often think about, and then also our thoughts in order to clearly and effectively get our ideas out, either verbally in a conversation, articulating those, or in writing. The question to reflect on is, does your brain organize language, both spoken and written? That's one question. And part two, do you keep your quote unquote stuff where you can find it? So can you find what you need? Is your work area neat and organized? Like your pantry, your dressers, all those things cleared out, organized, and kind of maintained. So what you might see, losing a train of thought, speaking in a non-sequential order. This happens often, where like our kids might come home and tell us a whole series of events, and it takes us a minute to kind of process it down and distill it down into a sensical line of thought. Misplacing items, not finding what you need, messy room, personal space, backpack, binder, all of that, just kind of disorganized and messy.
So what can we try? Well, for our binder, we can try color-coded folder systems, one for each subject. While we're in the house, right before we leave, that can get really tricky. Remembering what we need to do. We like to call that having a launch pad, whether it be a little desk that sits right at the front door, or whether it be a notepad that is right beside our sticky notes to the front door. That kind of tells us what we need before we leave the house. For our students, that might be backpack, lunch, phone. For my husband, it might be keys, wallet, phone. Graphic organizers are also helpful to assist with organization of thoughts and ideas for written responses, such as essays. Planners help us with thoughts and ideas of things that you need to complete throughout the day. One task that's really helpful with organization is guided cooking. It's a great strategy to practice getting things done in a sequential order. So now we're going to pause for a moment. I know that there were a few people that had an opportunity to write some things in the chat, but we want to give anyone else a chance to ask questions. And just for this section, we have more to come, but we wanted just to take a pause. We know we gave a lot of information. So we're going to give it a minute in case people, you can feel free to raise your hand or throw something else in the chat if you'd prefer. And if not, we can keep going.
There will be other pauses for Q&A. So if there's nothing right now, know that there'll be another moment later to come.
Okay. All right. So I think we'll move on then. Time management.
Okay, so another biggie when we think about executive functioning is managing time. It's that ability to have an internal awareness of the passage of time. Time is tricky because it's abstract. We can't see it. And an awareness of time, a lack of awareness of time, makes it challenging to get things done on time, to be where we are supposed to be. And so the reflective question to think about is, are you on time for commitments, classes, and deadlines? And do you use your time efficiently? What you might see turning assignments in late, so things that are just not on time, late to or missed activities, oversleeping, over or underestimates how long a task will take. This is also frequent, kind of losing time. I'm going to hop in the shower for 3 minutes, take a 5-minute shower, and then it's 20 minutes later. Or being called down for dinner. Okay, I'm coming in a second, like 10 minutes later. So that is a frequent manifestation of some of this difficulty.
So this is one of my favorite slides, because what Rachel just spoke about, this is like the essence of what I call like the core of executive functioning. Like, these are things that we see as executive functioning specialists and as parents with our own children that happen on the regular. And so those things that Rachel just mentioned, when I hear those, I'm like, beep, beep, beep. Yep. I can totally relate to this. So what are some things that I can try? Visual timers, having analog clocks throughout my house so that my kids can see the passage of time, or my clients can see the passage of time. They can see not just the present time when you look at a digital clock, but they can see time that's past and time that we future time, what we have to look forward to. We want to talk about using breaks wisely so that students are giving themselves some of that restorative time, not tending to other tasks that may cause more stressors. A lot of times our teenagers, when they are, or even younger kids, are turning to screens during their break time. And that can cause a lot of additional stress, so that when they try and get back on task, it really takes them a while to sort of unwind. Start with the smallest and easiest tasks with the earliest due dates. That way, we're not stressing about what hasn't gotten done, and we're able to just turn things in one thing at a time. The other thing that I find really helpful is crossing out tasks as you complete them to provide that dopamine hit. Isn't it great when you can just slice your pencil through a task or rip up a paper when you've completed something, and that provides you with that motivation to really get to the next task. I have this strong memory of my mom creating lists, and as she would get through them, she would go and love to tear it up, and then she would move on to the next task. It just motivated her. So the next one we're going to talk about is goal-directed persistence. Hold on one second. I apologize. A little bit of technical difficulties.
And I'm
There we
going to
go.
jump in. I saw there was another a question in the chat about talking about EF, executive functioning, and how it often co-occurs with other conditions. We're going to get to that briefly at the end, but yes, so very important point to kind of talk about some of the comorbidity or co-occurrence with other conditions. So we'll get there. Okay, goal-directed persistence. So this is the ability to stick with and finish a task to completion. So you have that goal, and can you stick with it? That's okay. Stick with it. This impacts any kind of large or long-term projects. It is really challenging for those who have reduced attention spans for a variety of reasons. And so that makes this particularly difficult. The reflective question to think about as we discuss this is, do you finish things, or do you tend to have partially completed assignments or projects? So are they done, or are they kind of sitting around? So what you might see: incomplete assignments, completing assignments but doesn't submit them. A burst of inspiration. So that's a great project, I'm so excited. And then you maybe get started, you buy the yarn and you buy the crochet needles, and then you do 2 stitches and then it sits there for 2 months on your couch. So that just kind of talking a little bit about what goal-directed persistence is.
So what can we try? Well, for some students, creating incentives and rewards for completion of goal is helpful. I will say that for other students, this can cause additional stress. So we really want to know your child when you're looking at the different things that you can try, the different strategies. We want to have a clearly defined goal and provide and check for understanding of relevance. So we want to make sure that the child knows why this goal is important. Students with executive functioning, if they don't understand the relevance behind something, they tend to have lack of motivation to do it. And isn't that really true of all of us? I feel like that's really true for myself. I need to know why I'm doing something. Establish and break down appropriate goals, realistic deadlines, identify barriers that may prevent you from reaching your goal, and then address them with thoughtfulness. Let's just not stop at saying, well, I can't do this because, or this is going to be tough because. We want to make sure that we're addressing those barriers with some real thoughtful thinking. And we want to, if we need help, encouraging our children to ask for that help. We also want to take time to reflect and revise plans as needed. Flexibility.
Okay, I also just saw a question come in. Do you find students with EF difficulties have a hard time reading analog clocks? Yes. And analog clocks are great because they are visual. They kind of give a full picture of time, as opposed to digital, which is just that 1 minute and one space in time. So yes, they may have difficulty. Marci and I are huge proponents of analog clocks, and especially if you have kind of a cheap one that you can draw on and write on and kind of chart out time. It is really a very helpful tool for students and individuals to just see time in a more holistic way. We see it in the moment, we see what happened, and we see what's coming. So we love analog clocks, but yes, that is kind of a skill that sometimes needs to be revisited. Okay, flexibility. So we're not talking about physical flexibility, though it's great to be limber and work on that. We're talking about mental flexibility. So it's the ability to adapt and shift our thought patterns in response to a given situation. So it's adjusting our thinking to match various situations. It could be something new or unexpected or something that's changed for us. The reflection question to ask yourself is, do you have difficulty transitioning from one task or activity to another, or adapting to a change in routine? So what you might see, this can look like really rigid thinking, having a really fixed idea of what something is going to be like and having difficulty if it doesn't match up with that expected idea in somebody's mind. It's an inability to kind of roll with the punches. All of a sudden, we've had to pivot and kind of adapt the way that we had hoped to come to this. I'll speak to myself. You may notice my setting is not what I ideally had wanted. And so just that ability to flex and roll with things. Difficulty with perspective taking. So struggling to understand another's perspective, and then struggling to reset when something goes wrong or is unexpected.
Okay, so what can we try? Well, social stories are great because they help students learn and understand what's coming. They can practice the event. Dialectic thinking, we are a huge proponent of. We use that word "and" so often in our conversations with our students. I see you feel stressed and you would like to still get this done. So really talking about that there might be two emotions happening at the same time and letting them know that we see that they're having both. And when they do have both, letting them know that that's okay. Notice and praise the time that your child is flexible. Praise, 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 but make sure that it's authentic praise. Tell them why and what it is that you're praising. Don't just say great job, but instead say kudos for doing, and then fill in the blank. And then practice hypothesizing. I love to do this with my children. They sometimes get a little annoyed, but sometimes I pause a show or a movie, or when we're reading a book, I like to always ask them, what do you think will happen next? What happens if that doesn't happen? It helps us with that mental flexibility for them to start hypothesizing what could happen, knowing that there could be multiple outcomes. Sustained attention.
Okay, I see a couple questions just to, okay, great. Sue already answered yes. Things will be available later and on the xMinds website posted out. And yeah, a couple questions about teenagers in particular. So the flexibility, adopting these strategies, basically like you might tell your child to do something, but then them actually following through, going back and editing schoolwork. So we'll talk to some of that a little bit later. But yes, we'll definitely address teenagers and some of these skills. Okay, sustained attention. So this is, again, simply the ability to direct and focus thoughts on a specific task for a duration of time. So this is keeping our focus. This is being able to complete something that's just going to take a little bit longer, which is really challenging for those who have reduced capacity to focus and attend. We need sustained attention to complete long-term projects, to read a novel, to complete classwork, to drive, to do functional daily activities. So the reflective question to think about is, are you able to stay focused on a task despite distractions, whether those are internal or external? And identifying some of the root of that is really important. Are the struggles, those distractions, are these thoughts in our mind that we're just can't stop thinking about that situation with a friend? Or is it like the loud noises in the hallway and the, bright lights or whatever? They're going to have different responses. So what this might look like: incomplete assignments, so kind of half done or partially completed, daydreaming. We see a lot of fidgeting around, difficulty sitting still, and kind of movement, and or easily bored.
Okay, so what can we try? Well, we have hands-on activities. Ask your child to repeat directions back to make sure that they have clarity of what it is that they need to do. use assistive technology to promote interest, take frequent breaks, and of course, have fidgets. Emotional control.
Okay. So emotional control, is a really important one to discuss. We are all human and we have emotions and our feelings. Sometimes of upset or whatever they might be, or elation. And emotional control is a really important executive function to talk about because it kind of overlays all the rest. It is the ability to control emotions and maintain focus on a task. If an emotion takes over, if we have a response to a situation, we're really angry, we're really frustrated in a moment, it is very hard for us to think clearly and think logically. So the question to ask yourself is, are you able to keep working even when you don't feel like it, or when something has really rattled you? So this emotional control, it's this ability to respond to or manage our emotions. So maybe it's taking, I'll let Marci speak to some practical, sorry. But just kind of, it's critically important to keep that focus. So what does this look like? It could be overreacting to situations. It could be feeling judged when given constructive feedback. It could be depression. It could be fear, anxiety, anger, overwhelm. You might have somatic complaints like stomach aches, headaches, rapid heartbeat, changes in sleep patterns. All of those we'll speak to a little bit more as well, as they might warrant some additional follow-up or attention, and challenged family and or peer relationships.
Okay, so this is another one of my favorite slides because, again, as I mentioned, for teenagers. Okay, so emotional control is a huge part of my household. So not just for my children, but for myself and my husband, who are raising 4 teenagers. And what I like to think about is we have an emotional brain that thinks, and instead of let me rephrase that 1 second, a emotional brain that thinks instead of a thinking brain that feels. Nope, we're the reverse. A thinking brain that feels instead of an emotional brain that thinks. Yes, Rachel, one more time for me.
Okay. We have a feeling brain that thinks.
There we go.
Not a thinking brain that feels.
Perfect. So let me explain what that means. Okay, that means that we react to something with our emotional brain before we think about it logically. There we go. Okay. And so that always happens first. So that's why that metacognition, the ability to pause, is so important. They really connect with each other. So that when that reaction comes bubbling up, we're able to just stop and go, okay, let me pause. Let me think about how this, when I reacted, how did that work for me? In the last time I did that? Did that react with a positive consequence? Did that react with a negative consequence? And ways that we can work on this is by using positive self-talk, identifying and reducing triggers, mindfulness, attention shifting strategies. And I want to just pause myself for a second to say, we're not just practicing these in the moment, but we're practicing these all throughout our week, all throughout our day. We also want to remember to be kind to our future self. This is one of mine and Rachel's favorite sayings. We want to work on completing things instead of procrastinating, so you won't feel so stressed. You won't have that anxious anticipation of what's to come or all that we have in front of us. And we want to aim for regulation and not repression. We don't want to suppress. Again, we're going to pause. We still have more to come, but we want to give an opportunity to ask questions that haven't been put in the chat yet. And so feel free again to raise your hand, or we want to just take a moment to look at the chat. We're going to pause to give you that moment.
Marci and Rachel, there was a question that was sent beforehand, which kind of dovetails nicely with what you were just talking about. The question is, what are the best ways to help a child work on skills when they are anxious or avoidant?
So the best ways to practice that or the best way to handle that is to practice skills when they are not anxious and avoidant, so that they can access those skills when they are feeling anxious or when they do want to avoid. Because if we're practicing those on the regular, they're going to come much easier. They're more familiar. So I like to have those coping skills written down in a list. Sometimes for our teenagers, they like to have them on their notes on their phone that they can refer to. If you're an adult, you might want to have them on your desk where you're working. If you are a younger child or you have a younger child, you might want to keep them on a piece of paper that you can pull out from a folder so that it's something that they can work on, and maybe set aside a time each day to work on those. Thanks, Melanie.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions we have before we continue going? Okay, so with that said, the next slide that we're going to talk about and the next section that we're going to talk about is accommodations and modifications. And if you were in mine and Rachel's presentation on Tuesday night, this is going to be somewhat of a repeat, but I kind of love that because this is so important and it's a way to reinforce what we spoke about. So I'm going to start talking about the differences between accommodations and modifications. So accommodations enable equitable access to instruction. It layers the playing field. Accommodations are changes in how the student learns instead of what the student learns. I really want us to focus on that word how, so I'm going to say that again. Accommodations are changes in how the student learns or accesses the material. Accommodations are changes in timing, formatting, setting, scheduling, response, and our presentation. Now we're going to take a look at the definition of modifications. Modifications change the what the student is, it changes in what the student is taught or expected to learn. So again, accommodations is the how, modifications are the what. Modifications are provided to students who require additional support to accommodations. Modifications can be used in conjunction with accommodations, meaning that they can be used together. Modifications are changes to content, rigor, test and assignment expectations, and academic standards.
Okay, so we kind of touched on a bunch of these, but we're going to run through really quickly just accommodations for EF challenges at school, and then we'll also talk about some modifications. But some of these may be repeated from what we've presented earlier. So visual accommodations. So it could be visual schedules, directions, class rules, expectations, timers. Marci and I are huge fans of timers, and there are so many great ones available for purchase. Breaking down assignments into smaller steps with sub deadlines to support that planning and prioritization. Preferential or flexible seating, whatever that might be for the student. Certainly use of fidgets, copy of teacher or peer notes, additional response time to really encourage that pause and think. And like Marci was saying, teaching these skills in isolation outside of a moment of need and stress, teaching some pause or think time, like we call it extra wait time, but it's really just think time. Take some time to think, and really using that language and modeling that, particularly at times when you don't need this skill, will help support your child in moments when they do need to fall back on that. Reduce distraction. Using any sort of like noise canceling headphones are incredibly beneficial for students, but also making sure that work environments are neat and clear and organized. Keeping organizational tools on the student's desk in a predictable placement so that everything has its own place and the student knows where to go for that. Fewer items per page or line, and organizational aids such as graphic organizers, outlines, planners, checklists. And again, there are so many available right now. There are great paper pencil ones, and there are apps and other tools just even the Google Suite alone offers so many tools that are more easily synced for students who are navigating, you know, whether it's a Google Classroom or Canvas or whatever portal their school or college or university is using. Some of those digital tools are really nice for helping to sync all of that information more readily for the student.
Okay, so, and just to reiterate this for a second, a lot of these are best practices that teachers are doing already in the classroom. If you have, so you'll see that when you have a 504 or an IEP plan, the team might say something like, you know, these are already things that, you know, we're not going to write this down because these are already things that a teacher is doing in the classroom. It's okay to still ask to have some of these written down. While we hope that these are best practices that all teachers are doing, a lot of these, you want to ensure that every classroom that your child is moving towards, they have these accommodations that go with them. So now we're going to move to modifications of EF challenges. I think, Rachel, you are back on. You were a little
Am
further.
I? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Again, with the flexibility, change in expected plan over here. So I appreciate everybody's patience if I have tech difficulty on this end. But modifications, so as Marci described, those are changes to what the expectations are. So some frequent things that we might see are reduced number of questions on an assignment or test, providing alternative assessments to demonstrate knowledge. So it could be a written, project-based, oral, something else, reducing the variety of tasks that are expected to be completed, providing an alternate curriculum. So actually changing the whole expectations for the child, pacing learning differently, and grading using a different or alternate standard.
And so when we talk about before that the accommodations, some of those can be incorporated in best practices. Modifications are generally not already put into best practices. These are something that are on an IEP that are designed specifically for your child. Not that the accommodations aren't specific for your child, but these are generally not things that a teacher can just do with their best practice strategies. So with that said, I have some favorite slides, as you can see, and this is another one of them. So not every accommodation or modification fits every child. How many of you have thought about going into your child's special education meeting or 504 meeting or even parent conference, and you're like, oh my God, I'm only gonna have 15 minutes. I'm only gonna have like, you know, an hour to get through this. And I'm not sure that I'm gonna get everything talked about. And you write your list and you take it into the meeting and you know that like this is what I'm gonna stick to. I sort of think about this like when I walk into Costco. Like, okay, I know I'm going to stay focused on my list. I know there are these pretty little things that are happening that I might want to pick up along the side, but I want to make sure that I'm only getting what is on my list that I have with me. Because we all know when we walk out of Costco, we tend to walk out with more than we actually need. So with that said, when we walk into a meeting for special education, in the desire to get as many modifications and as in a desire to offer our child and obtain as much support as possible, we tend to grasp onto as many accommodations and modifications that are there. There's usually a whole laundry list. What we want to do is make sure that the ones that we are putting down for our child are meaningful and relevant to the executive functioning barriers. And again, we're just talking about executive functioning here, but really let's generalize this and say to anything that's on your child's plan. Be really careful of not getting into that laundry list hazard. Just because we have these accommodations, we don't necessarily need to put them all on. We want to make sure that we are honing in on self-awareness, self-advocacy, and reflection when we're looking at accommodations and modifications. For our older children, we're making sure that they're involved in these meetings so that they can help us reflect on what's working and what's not working. We don't want to put an accommodation or a modification that they feel is not helpful onto a plan But if we know that it's something they might need, like extra time, that they do well with that support, but they might not want to go in to a different setting to have that extra time, we want to have our child talk with a team about perhaps a plan B that works specific to them. We want to, for our younger students that are not necessarily able to go into the meeting, we want to make sure that we are talking about that self-awareness, or making sure that we talk to them so that we have they have a self-awareness of what needs to work, and we are their voice for them, that we're talking to the team about what they feel is necessary. Okay, moving on to our final thoughts. Okay, I think we might have lost Rachel. So final thoughts on executive functioning. I'm going to be flexible and roll with it. Executive functioning challenges can exist with autism, learning differences, and other diagnoses. Executive functioning deficits can be chronic, change with age, and emerge when someone is experiencing temporary stress. If your child has ADHD, you may find starting with treatment of ADHD leads to diminishing problems with executive functioning. Even with ADHD treatment, executive functioning challenges may be best addressed through the intervention of an executive functioning coach or specialist. When executive functioning challenges exist alongside social emotional concerns such as depression, anxiety, or other mental health concerns, mental health is always addressed first because that's the priority. So I know we've got about 7 minutes left, and I want to take time to make sure that we have opportunity to ask or answer any additional questions. Sue, please feel free to let me know if there are any. Yes.
There are a lot of questions that were asked beforehand as well as in the chat. And I think Rachel said she was going to get to it later in your presentation.
Sure.
But they're mainly about how to motivate your teens to go back and revise, whether that's writing or math and reviewing their work. You talked about self-advocacy and self-awareness, but how do you get a teen to use those strategies?
So the first thing that and Rachel, welcome back. The first thing that I would say is that it's important to reflect, teach them to reflect as to why they need to go back and edit. So, and again, it's reflecting in times, not when we're focused on work, but in other times throughout, their day. So, and then kind of teach them that this is something they can also do with their work. So when we stop and we think about something, we then can come back and look at it and be able to better look at it with a clear vision. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
We did have a question about, it's a why question. Why do so many public schools not address executive functioning skills until middle school?
So executive functioning, first of all, this topic is really evolving. We're seeing educators become more aware that this is something that they need to focus on. But what we see is in the elementary school, because the children their executive functionings are just starting to really blossom and starting to emerge, we're seeing teachers are able to work on that using best practices. So I really think that they are working on the executive functions. You're just not hearing that term coined when they're working on it, because it's just a part of things that they already do. When we get into middle school and we have a lot more multitask assignments and subjects, where instead of staying in one classroom during the day, we're going to 7 different classrooms throughout the day, that's when that term really comes up. Any other questions?
Melanie, were there any more questions that were submitted ahead of time?
Yeah, those are some of the questions that I just asked. Those were submitted ahead of time. Here's a few more that were asked prior. And you may have covered it in your presentation. What are your suggestions to encourage your child to avoid procrastination in homework?
Okay, so again, it's really individual. Taking a look at really what works for each child. So in order to answer that as cohesively as I would like to, I would actually really need to know your child and what works best for them. But using calendars, planning backwards is really helpful when you have a project and you start with the end date and then you plan backwards to where we are today. Really helps a student not procrastinate because they know what they need to do each day all the way up until something's due. Estimating time and recognizing how much time each portion of the task takes is very helpful. But again, it's based upon the individual, the child's age, and where they are developmentally.
Can you also address, someone asked about how to use these strategies in college when classes are at different times and different days, and it's harder to juggle?
Okay, so unfortunately, Rachel isn't able to address this one. I don't know that we can hear her, but Rachel is one of our college consultants that works for Enhanced EFS. We can sort of hear you.
Go ahead and turn it.
Okay, so so things that you would want to do when you are looking at a college schedule is, again, you'd want to encourage using a planner. You want to encourage trying to get as many classes as you can start at the same time throughout the week. So if you have math on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, then you might want to have English begin your day, and that starts, let's say, at 9. Then you may want to begin your day at on Tuesday, Thursday at the same time you began it on Monday, Wednesday. So you really develop those routines and those same habits. Even though you have different classes and different things happening on different days, the more routine based that you can get where you're just swapping out one class for next is incredibly helpful.
And there is a question as well about ASD in adults over 25.
Mm-hmm.
Would you modify any of those strategies for an adult?
So again, that's very individualized. We do, Rachel and I absolutely work with adults. But again, in order to know what I would need to modify, I would need to know the exact challenges that individual was having. And then of course, where their strengths are, because we'd want to build from their strengths and enhance the strengths.
Okay. And then another question about asking for strategies to address the root cause of the executive functioning. Examples would be strategies for brain development or connection building and brain stimulation.
So I feel like we did answer a lot of that in our presentation. And again, with each executive functioning, that's why when we went through it slide by slide, you'll find that there's a different strategy to build for each one. So just as an example, for working memory and to work on memory, a fun thing to do at home is to play cards or play memory games. Or to play Rummy Cube. It's one of our favorite games here, where it challenges your brain to remember what's happening beforehand. So again, with the different executive functionings, and I know that this presentation will be available on the xMinds website we are recording, you can feel free to go back and take a look. I also want to say that if you want to reach out to myself or Rachel, we're happy to answer any questions. I know our information is provided in the chat. And Rachel is sharing in the chat that she apologized for her tech disruption, and she's happy to answer any questions, which is why we work as such a great team, because she knows that's probably what I just said too.
Okay, Melanie, are there any more questions? It is 1 o'clock or a little after at this point, so we need to close things up.
We've covered most of them, yes. Thank you.
Okay. And so Marci and Rachel, you're happy to take people's questions afterwards by email, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so anyone who didn't get their questions answered, please feel free to contact Marci and Rachel, and they will be happy to address your specific questions. Okay, I think we're going to close this down because it is 1 o'clock. We want to be mindful of everyone's schedules. Thank you so much, Marci and Rachel.
Of course, it's our
Really
pleasure.
wonderful information. And I'd like to invite everyone in our audience to complete a quick 2-question feedback form. So Annie has put that link, I assume, into the chat. If she hasn't, Annie, please do. You probably already have. So we've recorded this presentation and we'll email you a link to the recording in the next couple of days, along with a link to the slides as well. And they'll also be posted on our website. So please join us for the next speaker event in our Special Education Basics series. It's going to be a 2-night event in which MCPS staff will present about their programs. These are all the programs and placements that are where autistic students are commonly placed. So that's going to be on Tuesday, February 7th and Thursday, February 9th. The speakers will all be MCPS staff, and they'll all be talking about their own programs. So if you have a child on the spectrum in MCPS, I think this will be a lot of important information for you. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. And once again, thank you to Rachel and Marci.
A pleasure.
For the day.
Have a great day.